My best friend borrowed my house savings but screamed at me for asking her to pay it back, so I stopped asking nicely and started asking legally. Rena and I met in college and stayed close after graduation. She was in my wedding. I was in hers. When her marriage fell apart 2 years later, I showed up with boxes and helped her move. When she needed a co-signer on her apartment, I signed. When she got laid off and couldn't make rent for 2 months, I covered it. No questions. I never kept score. That's how I am with people I care about. 4 months ago, Rena called me crying on a Tuesday night. She said her car needed a new transmission and the repair was $4,000. Credit cards maxed. Nothing in savings. She asked if I could lend it and she'd pay me back in 30 days when her tax return came in. I said yes. I transferred the money the next morning. 2 weeks later, she called again. Her landlord had raised her rent and she needed first and last plus a deposit or she'd be homeless. $3,000 more. She said she'd add it to what she already owed me and pay everything back together. I transferred it. $7,000 total. That money was not extra. My husband Newton and I had been saving for a down payment on a house. That $7,000 came directly out of our savings. Newton didn't argue. He just said, make sure she pays it back. 30 days came and went. No money, no call. I waited another week before texting her because I didn't want to be pushy. She said her return got delayed. The accountant messed something up. Give me 2 more weeks. I said okay. 2 weeks later, she said the return came in smaller than expected, and she could only pay back $1,000 right now, the rest in monthly payments. I said okay. The $1,000 never came. 10 days later, she said things were tight. She needed more time. I said okay. A month went by. Nothing. I texted her one more time and said I wasn't trying to pressure her, but we really needed the money back because we were trying to buy a house. She read the message and didn't respond. 2 days later, I saw Rena post a photo at a rooftop bar downtown. New dress, new nails, a bottle of wine I knew cost $90 because Newton and I had ordered it once on our anniversary. 3 days after that, she posted from a spa. Full day package, hot stone massage, facial. The next weekend, a concert. Floor seats, VIP section. She tagged her new boyfriend Aiden in every photo, a guy she'd been seeing for 6 weeks. I didn't comment on any of it. I just texted her and said hey, checking in about the money. She finally responded. She said she was going through a lot right now and didn't need this pressure from me. I said $7,000 is a lot of money and we needed it back. She said she didn't have it. I said I'd seen what she'd been doing on weekends and it seemed like she had money available. 2 days of silence. Then she texted me and said we should meet up for dinner and talk. She picked the restaurant, an expensive place on the west side where appetizers were $25. She was already seated when I got there. Cocktail in front of her. Bruschetta already ordered for the table. I sat down. She smiled and started talking about Aiden, how great he was, how he took her to a beach resort the weekend before, how he was talking about getting a place together. I let her talk for 10 minutes. Then I said, Rena, we need to talk about the money. Her face changed. She put her drink down and said she told me she didn't have it right now. I said you borrowed $7,000 4 months ago and you haven't paid back a single dollar. She said she was aware of the amount. I said we had to push back our house search because of this. She said she was sorry, but she couldn't give what she didn't have. I said you spent the last month going to spas and concerts and rooftop bars. She leaned forward and told me those were gifts from her boyfriend. I said the nails and the dresses and the dinners were all gifts too. She said her boyfriend takes care of her. I said then ask him to help you pay me back. She got quiet for a second. She picked up her cocktail and took a slow sip and put it back down without looking at me. I could see her trying to decide which version of herself to put on. The sad one, the angry one, the misunderstood one. She'd done this with people before. I'd watched her do it. I just never thought I'd be the one sitting across from it. I said, Rena, I'm not trying to fight with you. I'm trying to get my money back. The money you asked for. The money you promised to return. She looked up at me and her eyes were wet, but her face wasn't soft. Her face was hard underneath the wet. That's when she lost it. She pushed her chair back and stood up. She told me I was being selfish. She said she came to me at her lowest and I was supposed to be her friend. She said real friends don't keep a tally. She said I was ruining the friendship over money. She said this loud enough for the tables around us to hear. People were looking. She grabbed her purse and said she couldn't believe I was doing this to her. Then she walked out. The next day, I got a text from her that said, I think we need space. I sat on my couch for a long time staring at my phone. I went through every conversation we'd ever had about money. Every time she'd asked for help. Every time she'd promised to pay me back for something small. The $100 I'd lent her for groceries 2 years ago that turned into a never mind, let's just call it even. The $200 for the dentist before her wedding that she said she'd Venmo back and never did. The little ones I'd let slide because they were small and she was my friend. Lying there on the couch, I realized those weren't accidents. Those were rehearsals. She'd been practicing on me with small amounts for years, and I'd been training her to expect it. The $7,000 wasn't a betrayal. The $7,000 was the version of this story where she finally asked for something I couldn't afford to let slide. I sat with that for a long time. Then I pulled up every single text I'd ever sent Rena about the money this time. Every promise she made. Every excuse. Every read receipt with no reply. I screenshotted all of it and saved it to a folder on my laptop. Newton sat next to me and said nothing for a while. Then he said 4 words. Call a lawyer tomorrow. He said it without looking up from his phone. He said it like he'd been holding the sentence in his mouth for weeks, waiting for me to be ready to hear it. He looked at me and said, you've been a doormat for her since college. Don't be one now. I wasn't angry anymore. I was done. And there's a big difference between angry and done. The next morning, I called a local office that did free consultations. The lawyer told me $7,000 fell inside small claims court limits in my state. I didn't need a full attorney. I just needed guidance on how to file. I had everything she said I needed already, sitting in a folder on my laptop. I filed that week. Newton came with me to the courthouse. The clerk asked if I'd tried to resolve it outside of court. I told her I'd been trying for 4 months and Rena had told me I was selfish for asking. The clerk stamped the paperwork. That night, Newton and I sat at the kitchen table after dinner. He pulled out his phone and opened our savings account. He turned the screen toward me so I could see the balance. I already knew it wasn't good, but seeing the number made it worse. He looked at me and said we were supposed to be looking at houses this month. I nodded because I knew. He said every month we wait, prices go up. He wasn't saying it to make me feel bad. He wasn't blaming me, but the truth of it sat between us like something heavy. That $7,000 wasn't just money Rena owed me. It was the house we were supposed to be building a life in. It was the yard we talked about, the extra bedroom for when we were ready for kids. Every month that money sat in Rena's pocket instead of our savings account account, our dream got a little further away. This wasn't just about a friendship anymore. This was about our future. And Rena was holding it hostage with her excuses and her silence. I closed the banking app and put Newton's phone face down on the table. I told him we were going to get it back. He nodded and said, I know we are. Later that night, I was lying in bed scrolling through my phone when I saw it. Rena had posted again. New photos, a weekend at a beach resort, palm trees in the background, a pool with blue water, a fancy drink on a little table next to a lounge chair. She tagged Aiden in every picture. The caption said healing season with a little sun emoji. Healing season. She was healing at a beach resort while I was sitting at home doing paperwork to get my own money back. I didn't feel angry. I felt something colder than anger. I screenshotted every photo. I saved them to the folder. 3 days later, Rena was officially served. I knew the exact moment it happened because my phone lit up with 6 missed calls from her in the span of 20 minutes. I didn't pick up. Then a text. Are you serious right now? 5 words. No apology. No offer to pay. Just disbelief that I'd actually done something about it. I didn't respond. For 4 months, she'd ignored my messages, dodged my calls, made me feel crazy for wanting my own money back. Now she could sit with that feeling. The next afternoon, my phone rang at work. Dylan, a mutual friend from college. He said Rena had called him crying. He said she told him I was suing her over a gift I'd given her. He said she told him I'd offered the money and now I was going back on my word. I stopped walking in the hallway outside the break room. A gift. She actually called $7,000 of my house savings a gift. I told Dylan that was never the case. I had texts where she called it a loan. I had texts where she promised to pay me back when her tax return came in. Dylan said she'd told him a very different story. He said suing someone you've known a decade was a little extreme. The guilt hit me so hard I almost couldn't breathe. For 5 seconds I almost said maybe you're right. Then I thought about the savings account, the house, the spa, the concert, the rooftop bar, the beach resort. I said, Dylan, she's spending money on luxury every single weekend and telling me she can't afford $1 toward what she owes. He went quiet. He said he didn't know about that. I said there's a lot you don't know. That night I texted Dylan and told him I was sending the screenshots. Read them, then decide if I'm being extreme. I sent everything in order, dated, timestamped. An hour later he texted back. 1 line. I didn't know any of this. I'm sorry. I saved that conversation too. Not because I needed it for court, but because it reminded me I wasn't crazy. A few days later the texts from strangers started. The first one came on a Tuesday at lunch. A number I didn't recognize. It said Rena told me you're suing her and she's really struggling. I hope you can find it in your heart to forgive. I read it 3 times. I didn't recognize the number, but I knew exactly who was behind it. The next morning, a different number sent something similar. Different area code, different wording, but the exact same tone. Something about how Rena was going through a hard time and how taking her to court was only going to make things worse for everyone. Same guilt, same angle, same playbook. Rena was campaigning. That's the only word for it. She was calling people, telling her version of events, and giving them my number so they could text me and try to make me feel bad. She was building a story where she was the victim and I was the bully. She was doing the same thing she did with Dylan, except this time she was doing it with people I didn't even know. People who had only heard her side and would never hear mine. I didn't respond to either text. I screenshotted both of them and saved them to the folder. Another piece of evidence. Another move on Rena's part that proved she was willing to do anything except actually pay me back. I showed Newton the text that night and he shook his head. He said she's getting desperate. I said good. 2 weeks before the court date, I came home from work and there was an unfamiliar car in my driveway. Black, expensive looking. I walked up to the front door and Rena was sitting on my porch steps. Aiden was next to her, leaning against the porch railing like he belonged there. Rena stood up when she saw me. Her whole energy was different. Calm, almost sweet. She said, can we talk? Just for a minute? I don't want this to go to court. You're my best friend. And I swear, something inside me pulled so hard it almost broke me. Because this was the Rena I remembered. This was the voice that called me crying at midnight when her husband walked out. This was the girl I helped carry boxes for. The one I co-signed a lease for without thinking twice. The one who squeezed my hand at my wedding and told me she'd never had a friend like me. Standing there on my porch with that soft voice and those big eyes, she looked exactly like the person I'd trusted with everything. For 5 seconds, I almost said, okay, let's sit down. Let's figure this out. Let's go back to being us. The words were right there on my tongue. Then Aiden stepped forward. He reached into his jacket and pulled out a white envelope. He held it out toward me like he was handing me a tip at a restaurant. He said, I told Rena I'd help settle this. There's $2,000 in here. Take it and we call it even. No court, no drama. I looked at the envelope. I looked at his hand. $2,000 out of 7. I did the math in my head without even trying. That's not even a third. I said that's not even a third of what she owes me. Aiden shrugged. A casual little shrug like we were talking about splitting a dinner check. He said it's what we can do right now. Take it or leave it. The way he said it. Like he was doing me a favor. Like I should be grateful that he'd driven to my house and offered me less than 30 cents on the dollar for money that was supposed to buy me a home. I looked at Rena. She was standing behind him now. Her eyes were on the ground. She wouldn't look at me. Not even for a second. And that's when something clicked in my head. Something I couldn't unsee once I saw it. I said, Rena, you told me those spa trips and concerts were gifts from your boyfriend. You said he takes care of you. You said that was his money, not yours. Now your boyfriend is standing on my porch offering me $2,000 like it's charity. Which is it? Does he have money or doesn't he? Her whole face changed. The sweetness was gone. That calm, friendly thing she walked in with just disappeared. Her jaw got tight and her shoulders came up and she looked at me like I'd just said something nasty to her. She said, why are you making this so difficult? I almost laughed. I really almost laughed. She was the one who borrowed $7,000 and didn't pay back a cent. She was the one who screamed at me in a restaurant. She was the one who sent a mutual friend to guilt trip me. She was the one standing on my porch with her boyfriend and an envelope full of not enough money. And I was the one making it difficult. That was the moment I knew for sure. I wasn't dealing with someone who felt bad about what she did. I was dealing with someone who was mad that it wasn't working anymore. The tears, the excuses, the guilt trips, the sweet voice on my porch. None of it was real. It was all just different ways of getting me to shut up and take the loss. I looked at Rena, and then I looked at Aiden, and I said, I'm not taking $2,000. I'm not dropping the case. You owe me $7,000, and you're going to pay it. The words came out steady. No shaking, no second guessing. I meant every single single one. Aiden's whole posture changed. He stood up straighter and took a step toward me. Not a big step, but enough that I noticed. He looked me in the eyes and said, "You really want to do this the hard way." Before I could even open my mouth, the front door opened behind me. Newton stepped out onto the porch. I don't know how long he'd been on the other side of that door, but he must have heard enough. He didn't look at me. He looked straight at Aiden. His voice was low and even, and there was nothing friendly about it. He said, "Get off my property, both of you, now." The porch went quiet. Aiden looked at Newton. Newton didn't move. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. He just stood there behind me with the door open and his eyes on Aiden like he was waiting. Rena grabbed Aiden's arm. She tugged him toward the steps. He looked like he wanted to say something else, but she pulled harder and he turned. They started walking back toward the car. Their shoes on the driveway were the only sound. Then, right before she got to the car door, Rena stopped. She turned around and looked at me. Her face wasn't sweet anymore. It wasn't sad. It was hard. She said, "You're going to regret this." She got in the car. Aiden got in the driver's side. The engine started and they backed out of the driveway and drove away. Newton put his hand on my shoulder and guided me inside. He closed the door and locked it. The house was quiet. I stood in the hallway for a second without moving. That thing I felt on the porch 5 minutes ago, that pull, that little voice saying maybe we can work this out, it was gone. Completely gone. Like someone had reached into my chest and just removed it. In its place was something different. Something that didn't shake. Something that didn't second guess. Rena came to my home. She brought her boyfriend to my home. She offered me less than a third of what she owed and expected me to say thank you. And when I didn't, her boyfriend tried to intimidate me on my own porch. I went straight to my laptop at the kitchen table. I opened the folder. I wrote down everything that just happened while it was still fresh. Every word Rena said. Every word Aiden said. The white envelope, the $2,000, the shrug, the step forward, the look on Rena's face when I called out the contradiction about her boyfriend's money, and the last thing she said before she got in the car, "You're going to regret this." I typed it all out. I saved it. I added it to the timeline with everything else. Newton sat across from me at the table while I did it. He didn't say anything for a while. Then he looked at me and said, $2,000. She really thought that would work. I almost smiled. Almost. But my hands were still